Well, welcome to Dispatch Live. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Sarah Isgur, joined by Steve Hayes, Jonah Goldberg, and David French. You are watching the Dispatch Live debate reaction. Yeah. So, okay, let's just do quick reactions, and then we'll get to real questions. Steve, react.
Yeah. So the thing that I kept coming to, the overwhelming feeling that I kept coming to as I was watching the debate was I'm sad for my country, not to take us down, just to start. But the entire
your son Hunter got $3 million from Russia.
I just also want to say, Steve, you're the one who told us, like, happy Warriors, guys. Don't be sad.
Yeah, that's right. The three of us were all like, this is going to be terrible. It's going to be horrible. And Steve was like, oh, I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I know. Worst take in the history of the Dispatch podcast.
So, wow, you guys are like Donald Trump and I'm like Joe Biden. I said one thing and you all climbed on top of me.
Well, that's the point.
Look, I mean, just you asked for my first impression.
Yeah.
My first impression is this is a disappointing night for the country. I can't imagine that there are people who are watching around the country, estimates of 80 million. I think there were 84 million for the first debate 4 years ago, who are watching this screen, even if you're a partisan, even if you're on a team, even if you desperately want one side or the other to win, but who are watching this display tonight, this performance tonight, and thinking, boy, the country's in great hands. And that's discouraging. That's discouraging.
Jonah?
I found
By
it
the
to
way,
be...
this sounds like my favorite part of the debate, because there was a moment where nobody was talking for like,
Yeah.
like just 1 second. I was like, ah.
I felt like that maybe we should just nuke the planet from orbit and give the bees a shot at running things as the top of the ecosystem. Look, I think my first impression is it was that in a normal debate setting against a normal candidate, I don't think Biden had a particularly great night, but it just gets washed out with the tone that Trump set from the beginning. And I think it was sort of fascinating, and I'm sure we'll get to this. I think it was kind of fascinating in real time to watch on Twitter as the argument for the sort of the Trump defenders turned to, well, this is really all Chris Wallace's fault, which I think is an interesting place to go. I think that the strangest part, and I said this on Twitter, the strangest part about Trump's strategy tonight is that large numbers of people, I am sure, turned off their TVs in disgust. And I don't think a single one of them said, I've seen enough, I'm voting for Trump, right? I mean, like, and I do think Wallace had problems later in the night, and Biden did interrupt, and that's all point scoring. But the overall impression that Trump gave, I think, was not good for him strategically, because it reinforced all the reasons why the people he needs to convince to vote for him don't want to vote for him.
All right, David, quick first reaction.
I never thought that I would say that the 2016 Hillary-Trump debates were the Lincoln-Douglas debates by comparison. And I'm not going to both sides this. You know, I don't think Biden did as well as he could have done. And there were moments when he did exactly what I thought he might do, which was sort of slide where he gets his pride pricked and he says things that he shouldn't say. Like, you know, you shouldn't tell the president of the United States, shut up, man. You shouldn't do that. It instantly trended on Twitter, you know, because people liked it because maybe it was an ownage moment. But the bottom line is, it was almost as if Trump showed up as a caricature of himself, as if he was somebody who's saying, yeah, I'm the guy who fights. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to constantly interrupt with, you know, maybe the 2 or 3 real answers were fully given where there was no interruption. But it was almost like it was like Donald Trump decided to be Trump to 11. And I don't know that works for him.
If you're just joining us, welcome to Dispatch Live. What we're going to try to do here tonight is different. We're going to try not to give, obviously, partisan talking points. We're going to try not to do hot takes. We're going to try to just give strategically smart, thoughtful takes on a debate that was honestly not strategically smart or thoughtful. But we're going to do our best. So with that, and Jonah, I'm going to start with you. Did anything tonight change the race?
I don't think so.
And let me then push on that.
Mm-hmm.
My theory all along in this election is this is a turnout election. There aren't persuadables, and Steve and I will argue about that maybe later. But one theory in a turnout election that's different than Coke and Pepsi arguing over, drinking which drink, is actually depressing turnout can be a strategy. So could it, if nothing changed in terms of persuading voters or even turning out more of your voters, is it possible that people saw this and are like, never mind, I'm not going to vote?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, the overall disgust with the whole spectacle could dampen some turnout somewhere, I suppose. But, I did this podcast on the debates. I've been doing this. I did a column on the debates, been reading up on the debates. And I think that the convention, that what the experts say and the historians say is that most of them really don't matter. And a couple ever did. But the thing is not to score them on points, right? It's not about who won, who lost. It's not like how many, this round went to Biden, this round. It's whether or not they reinforce a theme or a narrative or they contradict it. And going into this, the narrative was that Trump is a chaotic kind of a bully, blunderbuss guy who governs as if his base is the only thing he cares about. And Biden was basically a quiet front porch candidate who wasn't going to bother a lot of people and was kind of running to be vanilla. And I don't think that if you watch this, or if you watch the clips that are going to be replayed after this, those narratives change.
So, Steve, there was a CBS poll that was released right before this asking why people are watching the debates. And spoiler alert, only 6% even answered that they were undecided. And I question whether those were truthful answers, but let's take people at their word. 6% came into this undecided. You believe in persuadable voters, like the Tooth Fairy. I'm curious.
The Tooth Fairy believes in persuadable voters too.
That is a not so subtle knife in the side during.
We're getting used to that from Sarah, aren't we?
Yeah, Sarah's a mean girl.
So for those 6%, did they actually stay and watch the debate? Do you think that they really were undecided? What was the either campaign strategy for that 6%?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would just point out that if the 6% were telling the truth, and you said we'll take them at face value on that, that's a big deal, right? I mean, it's not as big as in previous presidential elections. Certainly the undecided voters 5 weeks out, there were many, many more of them, a much higher percentage. But if it's 6% in the kinds of elections that we've seen in recent years, looking back to 2016, 80,000 votes in 3 states, that 6% could be determinative.
I mean, 6% of 85 million is about 5 million people in theory tuning into the debate who did not have their minds made up, or at least maybe thought they didn't have their minds made up.
Right. So I don't think that they probably saw anything necessarily that pulled them strongly in one direction or the other. But I have to say, I have a very different impression than David and Jonah on sort of relatively who did better or who might have helped himself tonight. I thought Donald Trump, Donald Trump was all of the things that Donald Trump always is. He was loud, he was interrupting, he was a bully, all of those things. But I thought he started pretty strong. He seemed to have command of information in his first answers. I thought he had an effective answer on the Supreme Court, a pretty effective answer on healthcare. And I thought Joe Biden was lost. He seemed lost and wandering. And every time Donald Trump interrupted Joe Biden, Biden would sort of shift his answer to whatever Trump had interrupted with. So he'd start a sentence and then he'd shift his answer. So I think Jonah's point is largely right. If you came in with an impression of these, there wasn't much here to change your impression. But for those persuadable voters, I think Donald Trump presented, and I'm doing this without any fact checking. So I am not fact checking this at all. I'm thinking of this as a voter who came in, who has not been following this obsessively as we all have, but who came in and is just looking at this sort of impressionistically without doing independent fact checking. I think Donald Trump looked stronger. He looked more confident in his answers. And I thought he was better overall than Joe Biden was tonight.
That is a fantastic example of the wrong opinion.
Well, we should say one sort of asterisk here. We should say that before we got together, we decided that one of us would not be on Twitter during the debate tonight, and that was me. So maybe you all were so persuaded by the people you saw on Twitter that you came to the wrong opinion.
Yeah, or maybe you're leaving out the fact that you were on Dan Bongino's Parler, and that's where you got all your takes.
Jonah, please, it's a parlay.
Is that what it's called?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
a parlay.
David,
Yes.
we've made a lot about the fact that, probably more than 80 million people, at least at the beginning of the debate, tuned in. Roughly 130 million people voted in 2016, and we have about 157 million registered voters. That actually leaves a lot of people who didn't tune into tonight's debate, who are probably the lowest propensity voters, the least likely to go vote, but a lot of them are going to go vote. So what are they going to hear about this debate? What are they going to see on Facebook? What are those like 30 to 60 second things that people are going to be sharing for those lower propensity voters that could actually be the theme of this debate?
I think the theme of the debate is going to be crosstalk and argument. And so what you're going to see are a whole lot of examples. So, right before we logged on, I had playing in the other room some of the commentary I was hearing from other networks. And they were saying this was the worst debate I've ever seen in my life. Like that was a kind of a consensus. This is the worst debate I've ever seen in my life. And so I think that rather than people are still showing clips, and I saw them on Twitter today, of George W. Bush giving that nod to Al Gore, that famous nod when Al Gore invaded his personal space. I mean, these kinds of, I think if you're going to pull out a clip, unless it's partisan press, and if it's purely partisan press, they will come out with a clip where Biden said, one of his effective lines was, it is what it is because Trump is who he is, talking about the coronavirus pandemic. And so you'll have partisan press pull out something. But I think if it's not that, you're going to have a lot of the mess, and you'll see a lot of the mess. And where I disagree with Steve is I think Biden, his whole argument is against the mess. Now, the downside is he couldn't stop it tonight. But I think that people realize that when you're dealing with someone who is a bully, it is extraordinarily difficult to do that in a way that makes you look composed with the perfect kind of answer. That is a very, very, very difficult thing to do. And if the floor was, well, Trump is going to show that Biden can't speak, that he's, got dementia or sunsetting or whatever kind of thing you want to say, I think that that's off the table right now. I think what's on the table with Biden would be, did he respond as effectively as you theoretically could to a whole bunch of hectoring and insulting and interrupting? And I thought a real low moment was when Trump went so hard after his son, Hunter. I just thought that was gross. And it was chum for a certain part of the hardcore MAGA base, but I just thought that was a really gross moment.
Jonah, looking forward, what do the next two presidential debates, one vice presidential debate, where do they go from here? We can't, I hope we can't just do this two more times. Does Joe Biden come to the next debates? Is this a good way for the Biden campaign to say, look, we showed up, he wasn't senile, we're not doing this anymore? Because as everyone else has pointed out, Trump is the one who needs to change the dynamics in this race. Biden's very happy with a 7-point national lead.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I you hear this a lot, that he shouldn't just do them anymore. And I can understand that. I just don't know that, quitting an agreed upon thing works for Biden. In some ways, I mean, look, I just go back to the part of David's point on this, though. I mean, in the days ahead, the important stuff is the clips that get repeated and recycled, right? And that forms the narrative. It's sort of like the clay of the conventional wisdom is wet for like 24 hours, and everyone takes their turns trying to pound it into the shape that they want, and then it congeals and becomes the thing that everyone has to genuflect to. And
more in 2020 than even 2016 or anything we've had so far. I mean, these debates will be consumed in a sense through social media.
That's right. And I think the shut up man thing will play, and I think that helps Biden. I think
you do.
I do.
You think the shut up man thing helps Biden?
I do, for sure.
Wow.
I think
I don't.
For people who are, certainly for people who are watching, if you watch, and I think it works because it speaks for when it's going to get played. It's going to get played in the context of Trump being a bully so much. But the other clip that I think went underneath the radar and is going to get a second hit is when Wallace asked them both to repudiate violence, and Trump was confused by what he could possibly mean by that, and then said, well, about the Proud Boys, I'll tell them to stand back and stand by, which is not really the repudiation of violence. It's more like, I shall keep my racist shock troops in reserve until I issue my orders, or that is the way it's going to be understood. And I think there are a few other things like that that are going to be recycled and consumed in ways that are bad for Trump. Biden had some too, but nothing of that sort of order. And so in some ways, I could see the argument that these debates aren't good for Trump. I mean, again, he used the last 15 minutes of this thing to basically throw out a whole bunch of inside stuff that only like hardcore Gene Pirro viewers will even really grok, right? I mean, that is not how you're reaching out. And I know Sarah doesn't think there are any persuadable voters out there, but I just think there are actually probably even a bunch of Trump-friendly voters who are like, what is he talking about? Yeah. So I think, let's put it this way. If there is a second debate, which I suspect there will be, it wouldn't surprise me if Trump's strategy changes a lot more than Biden's does, because I think Biden's strategy should work for him.
Just as a data point on that, as you were saying that about stand back and stand by, already the Axios clip of that has 1.2 million views of stand back and stand by. And that really is not a condemnation. And it's going to be interesting to watch sort of MAGA world over the next few days try to spin it into a hoax that he did anything other than condemn. But stand back and stand by is about as, I mean, that sounds a lot more like, hey, as you were just saying, hey guys, just be ready.
Yeah, keep your powder dry.
Yeah.
All right, Steve. I speak from some experience here, just keeping the three of you in line. Being a moderator is hard. Being a moderator, this debate looked very hard, but Wallace certainly did not maintain control of this debate. Are there things that you think he could have asked, done differently? A lot of Twitter, as you said, but far more of the Trump supporters that I have been texting with tonight thought that Wallace was incredibly biased against Trump and not just against Trump, but also in favor of Biden and helping Biden, especially as the debate went on, as he was probably getting more frustrated with the president. What would you have done differently as a moderator, or questions you might have asked?
I mean, what could he have possibly done differently? And, you know, it all sort of built to this climax when Chris Wallace said, out of frustration, when Donald Trump's, you know, he had shushed Donald Trump or said, be respectful or wait your turn or something. And Trump said, well, tell him the same thing. And Chris Wallace had in fact said, Vice President Biden isn't interrupting the way that you are, which was, of course, totally right. I mean, that was exactly right. Donald Trump had been interrupting the entire time. I thought Biden had been meek.
But Joe Biden did interrupt sometimes, and
Occasionally.
Wallace did not then stop Biden, and he kept chastising Trump. And Wallace, you know, in the way he was asking questions and the follow-ups he gave, I think it was fair to say that he had his thumb on the scale a little more as the debate continued.
I think he had his thumb on the scale for sort of civility and discussion. I mean, I thought his questions were very good. Chris's questions are always good, honestly. I thought what he was trying to do was sort of probe a level deeper. He was trying to get us to some place where we might have a discussion of, you know, an important policy, the direction of the country, things that really matter. And in that, he didn't succeed much. But he didn't succeed because he couldn't succeed, because that's not where this debate was going. Donald Trump was going to thunder at Joe Biden and make accusations. And Joe Biden, I think I disagree with Jonah on the question of the shut up man and how that will play. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but it seems to me that Joe Biden, if you look carefully at what he said in his first answer, he was made a point to call Donald Trump Mr. President, and then moments later referred to Donald Trump as the president. He wanted to, I think, start respectful and continue to be tough and respectful. I thought the shut up man, he just lost his cool. And understandable. I mean, I'm not saying I would have done differently if I were Joe Biden. It's easy to see why he would lose his cool. I just don't think that reflects well on him. If you're the guy who's saying, I'm this calming presence, I will return the country to normal, and then you sort of snap like that when you're pushed a little bit, I don't think that was a good play.
I think it's an interesting point. And you may be right. You know how much it pains me to say that kind of thing. But I will be surprised, because I think, look, when you have someone who is behaving in a way that would get you kicked out of a bar or a school board meeting, and you say, past the point where like literally everybody watching is already disgusted, and the guy says, will you shut up, man? I don't think that looks, particularly when you're a 78-year-old who looks like you should be eating a piece of pie and taking a nap, and you say it, you know, it's very sort of avuncular old man style. Will you shut up, man? I don't think it comes across as losing your cool. I think it comes across as exasperation with someone who's being boorish. I'm sure, even if that's my impression and I'm wrong, that is definitely going to be the mainstream media's impression of it, right? No one's going to say, get you, the New York Times and Morning Joe aren't going to be all like, Biden loses his cool. You know?
I mean, Jonah, that's what we expect from you, you know, sort of channeling the mainstream media as you do. Look,
someone's got to do it.
It's a good role for you.
What about a mute button? Why not have an ability for the moderator to silence the microphone of the person who is not talking?
Yeah, well, you know, in theory, if you had people who were only mildly violating the rules, then a mute button could be quite effective. But when you have mass scale interruptions, then you get into the mute button culture war, which is going to be, we have now determined that the mute button was used 2.5 times more on one candidate than the other candidate. And so, you know, I think the bottom line is, and this is just something we have to acknowledge, when somebody just careens through and does whatever they want to do, we don't have systems that are created very well to deal with that. You know, when we've had, you know, habits and norms for presidential debates, the system tolerates like going over a little bit. You know, to this day, we still think about in the 2012 foreign policy debate, the Candy Crowley moment, because it was this kind of break in the decorum at a key time. And it was like the only break. It was the only break. Whereas Chris Wallace had probably 20 Candy Crowley moments here where he was directly contradicting things that were being said from the debate stage. There was one moment that was quite profound to me when he was asking a question, basically saying to Trump, you're seeking to have Obamacare overturned, and yet you don't have a plan. And they kind of almost went through this, yes, I do. No, you don't. Yes, I do.
That
no,
is, yeah.
And so it felt like when you were careening through the habits and practices and the rules and the norms, I defy anyone to come up with a solution that will be accepted as fair in that circumstance.
Well, obviously, look, I mean, mute buttons won't do it. Pain collars. It's the only way to go.
But then we'll have the pain collar wars, Jonah.
Yeah, but those are good wars to have.
Sarah, can I ask you a question, since you're the person in this group who's actually worked at presidential campaigns at sort of the highest levels?
Sure.
So there's this discussion about potentially the Biden campaign saying this is it. Like, I showed up, I performed reasonably well or well enough, or I showed that I'm with it. And we're done with these debates because, we can't debate this guy, in effect, I think would be the argument. Would that work? Doesn't that just broadcast weakness if he's backing out and he's made these commitments to appear in these debates and he's now undoing his own commitments?
If they weren't 7 to 9 points up nationally, I think they would consider it a lot more, because they're very happy with where they are. Unless they see some massive changes in the numbers overnight, they're going to show up to the debates, because the race staying exactly as it is good for
what they want
right now.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think they would do it right now. It'd be interesting to see if the numbers shifted overnight for any reason that we're not picking up on. And then I think you might consider it. If they started bleeding out over this debate, then why continue to show up? Because they have a fairly good answer. And to Jonah's sort of reading the mainstream media, it's not like Morning Joe is going to criticize them for doing it. They're going to lean into it. Okay. We're running out of time. It's pretty late. I want to ask y'all the last question of the night to each one of you, which would be the first question of the night in any normal post-debate thing. What did each campaign come in trying to accomplish tonight that you picked up on? And how would you grade them on their own metrics of success? And I'm starting with you, Steve.
Yeah, so I mean, I think as I was saying in my previous answer to Jonah, I think the Biden campaign came in wanting to provide this huge contrast with Donald Trump, obviously, to be, respectful to the extent that he was able to be respectful, but to be tough and knowledgeable and show people that he understood issues in a way that Donald Trump didn't. Donald Trump was full of bluster. He would yell and scream a lot. And Joe Biden actually could answer the questions and could walk people through the details. I don't think he ever got a chance to walk through the details. And I think he allowed himself to be distracted too often, too easily, by Donald Trump's interruptions. And in that sense, I don't think he accomplished what he set out to accomplish. If they were playing defense, if they approached this from sort of a defensive perspective and said, look, as long as we don't have a face plant, we're fine. And you could see why they would say that. I mean, the Real Clear Politics presidential Trump approval in January 1 is roughly the same as it is today. The same is true with where the race is. So you can see them saying status quo and we win. Bless you.
That's why we do this by Zoom.
Yeah. So I think in that sense, they didn't really get the contrast that they were looking for. I think if you're the Trump campaign, you're looking for something that changes the dynamic of the race. And for the reasons that we discussed, well, I think he performed, I thought this was one of the better debates I've seen Donald Trump do, going back to 2016 and the Hillary debates, going back to the 2016 primary debates. I think this was, again, if I'm not fact checking, I thought this was one of his better performances. But was it so significant or so different that it changes the dynamics of this race that, that a pandemic and a collapse of the global economy and all these other things haven't? No, I don't think so.
All right, Jonah, their strategies, and how do you grade them?
Yeah, and this is why I think Steve is wrong. Steve was saying how Biden came in to do all of these things, and I don't think that's true. I think Biden came in to first do no harm. When you were ahead 5 to 7 points, and you seem to be gaining in some of these battleground states, you just want to maintain that. And you also want to, which is part of doing no harm, dispel what I always thought was an incredibly stupid strategic talking point from the Republicans of setting the bar of expectations so unbelievably low that if Biden came out and simply added short columns of single digit numbers together, he would disprove everyone who said he was, mentally incompetent or alive. I mean, literally, Trump has said a dozen times now, he doesn't even know he's alive. That is such a low bar to clear. And so that's part of doing no harm. And I think that Biden did no harm. In fact, and he cleared out that talking point. You're not going to hear a lot of Republicans. I mean, is Trump going to go around saying I demand a drug test now? I mean, maybe, but and meanwhile, I mean, again, if if Sarah's right that this is purely about turnout, I don't see how Trump going into this thinking only about turning out his voters is going to turn out more of them because of this. Some of them who are already really pumped to go out and vote for him will be even more pumped, but that misses the difference between necessary and sufficient. You can only count their votes once. The people who may not like his style, but were thinking about voting for him, they were reminded of why they don't like his style. The people who actually have some respect for Chris Wallace are going to be annoyed with him. And so I don't see, I mean, I don't see where he gained anywhere significant. And I can see very much at the margins where he might have lost. So I would say, and I think he went into this with the strategy of flummoxing and rattling Biden so much that Biden had some meltdown moment, and he did not. So if I'm right about what the Trump strategy was, I would say this was at best a C-, and I only grade him that high because I think Steve is right. It was one of his better debate performances, and he had fewer crazy run-on sentences than he normally does. And for Biden, I would say it was a solid B+.
David.
So I think Biden went in wanting to show that he was A, decent, and B, presidential. More decent than Trump and more presidential than Trump. I think he accomplished more on the decency front than the presidential front, simply because it's very difficult to seem presidential when in the middle of that kind of verbal back and forth. And at the same time, I'm going to slightly agree with Steve on the shut up man. Like, that's not, I understand where Jonah's coming from on, I think with Biden partisans, that's going to play pretty well. I think on the presidential front, that doesn't play great, but he did not go as far as he sometimes goes when he's really pushed. I mean, like we've seen the dog face pony soldier comments. We've seen the challenge people to a push-up contest. And you could tell that Trump was quite deliberately trying to push him into that moment when he went after Biden's performance at school and things like that. So I think that
Hunter, I think, was directly related to that. He was trying to get Biden to have a moment. And so some people are saying that was too much, it was too far, et cetera. I think you've said that, but there was a strategy behind that. The fact that the strategy didn't work doesn't mean that, he wasn't trying to execute some plan. Yeah,
he was trying. It was obvious to me what he was trying to do. So I think Biden came across as more decent. I don't think he accomplished the presidential side of his strategy as much as he wanted to, but he still came across as more presidential. And then I think with Trump, he wanted to be the alpha who exposed Biden. But there's a difference between an alpha and a bully. There's a difference between a leader and a bully. There's a difference between a commanding presence and a bullying presence. Those are different things. And so I think he came across as somebody who's just trying to be a bully, and that he didn't then expose Biden as not up for the job. I think at best what he did is he exposed Biden as exasperated. And normal human beings, when they're subjected to that kind of constant verbal attack, are, guess what? They're exasperated. And so I don't think that Trump accomplished what he wanted. I think that Biden did more. He accomplished it more. He didn't. I think if he's honest with himself, he will be upset about some of the stuff that the way in which he was distracted. But Sarah, you're.
I think that the Trump campaign went in with a strategy that this was a social media campaign, and they had 90 minutes to get 1 minute of Joe Biden losing his train of thought, having a moment. And so it didn't matter what happened the other 89 minutes. I think Trump did a very good job doing all the things you would need to do to try to get that moment. I don't think they got it. I'll be really interested to see what they put out over the next day. They're they're going to have a couple things that they could point to where Biden, he finally lets Biden talk and Biden doesn't really have anything to say. So, B- on that front. I think they executed it pretty well. I just don't think they got what they wanted out of it. The Biden campaign didn't want anything to change in this race. And so they needed Biden not to have one of those moments. I'm actually going to give them an A- on that. Yes, he could have been better, but he didn't need to be better. He needed to not give them that 1 minute, that 60 seconds that they were looking for. And they threw, Trump threw his best game, I thought, at Biden on that front. And Biden, again, maybe he didn't rise to the moment. He didn't need to. He just needed to not sink to the moment. And I thought he did that about as well as you could expect, given a miserable 89.
Can I add one coda here? There was the discussion at the end where Chris asked about the ballots and how each candidate was going to handle challenges, how they were approaching the ballot issues, whether they would agree to have every vote counted, what have you. And Chris, I think, pushed Trump to a place where Trump wasn't entirely comfortable, but he sort of blustered through and made his proclamations about ballots and threw out all sorts of examples that maybe aren't really examples. He misstated certainly what had happened in Pennsylvania, as Alec Dent, our fact checker, has pointed out. But he said twice in the middle of his responses, there was some crosstalk, so it was a little difficult to hear, but he said twice in the middle of responses, "This is not going to end well. This is not going to end well." And it felt to me more like a threat than a prediction. And it really, really worries me. And I wonder if we don't, on November 3rd or November 10th or December 30th, look back on that moment in this debate and think that was the moment that really told us something.
Oh, just one quick point on that. Not quite on that point, but related. The Proud Boys have already posted a new symbol with the slogan "Stand Back and Stand By" as their new motto, at least in this thing. Thank you to John Podhoretz, who texted it to me.
That was predictable.
Yep.
That was predictable.
So we've come full circle. This is why I think my impression from the debate was that it's disappointing that this is as the best the country can offer. And we leave with a discussion of how things might go very, very badly in the next 5 weeks.
But one can still live well.
We can. I mean, and cheers to that.
Thank you for joining us. This has been our Dispatch Live debate. We'll do this after every debate. We hope you'll come back and join us. Again, to the extent there are these debates, please come by thedispatch.com/30 days free if you want to try a membership trial with us. We have newsletters, we have podcasts. In fact, tomorrow morning, I'll see all of you again. We'll do our podcast to put out tomorrow night. We'll try to have slightly different topics maybe for discussion. So thank you. Have a wonderful night.